Question: did the Allies abandon the Jews? Did they actually know about the size and scope of the genocide taking place and simply look the other way? It's easy and even fashionable to argue, yes, that the Allies knew about the camps, that they overflew the railroad lines, but did not bomb them. Why was no rescue effort of Jews and other persecuted minorities even attempted? Can any excuse conceivably be made for the shocking failure to act? Some despairing voices still echo from the Holocaust, such as Shmuel Ziegelbaum, a member of the Polish Bund. When the Nazis occupied Warsaw, they demanded 12 hostages from the population to prevent further violence. Ziegelbaum volunteered to become one of them. On his release, he ultimately escaped to Belgium, then France, then the United States, and finally London. He spoke on BBC radio concerning the fate of the Jews of Poland. It will actually be a shame to go on living if steps are not taken to halt the greatest crime in human history. On May 11th, 1943, Ziegelbaum killed himself as a protest against the indifference and inaction of the Allied governments, leaving behind this letter. The responsibility for the crime of the murder of the whole Jewish nationality in Poland rests, first of all, on those who are carrying it out. But indirectly, it also falls upon the whole of humanity, on the peoples of the Allied nations, and on their governments, who up to this day have not taken any real steps to halt this crime. By looking on passively upon this murder of defenseless millions, tortured children, women, and men, they have become partners to the responsibility. I am obliged to state that although the Polish government contributed largely to the arousing of public opinion in the world, it still did not do enough. It did not do anything that was not routine, that might have been appropriate to the dimensions of the tragedy taking place in Poland. I cannot continue to live and to be silent while the remnants of Polish Jewry, whose representative I am, are being murdered. My comrades in the Warsaw Ghetto fell with arms in their hands in the last heroic battle. I was not permitted to fall like them, together with them, but I belong with them to their mass grave. By my death, I wish to give expression to my most profound protest against the inaction of the world as they watch and permit the destruction of the Jewish people. Yet, there remain serious questions that we have to address. When did the Allies actually know about the scope of the genocide? Did they, in fact, have the capability of rescuing the victims? Were the Allied governments, including the US government, to some extent anti-Semitic? Are they culpable for what they didn't do? To help answer these questions, there is some important new source material only declassified during recent decades. When it comes to the American government, we have the RG Records Book 226 of the OSS, the forerunner of the CIA, that reveals no particular sympathy toward the Jewish people, but no animosity either. In general, the American intelligence community during the early 20th century came to several conclusions. That Jews are the most talented people on earth. That the notoriously anti-Semitic tractate, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, is in fact a fabrication. But that Jewish immigration to the United States should nonetheless be restricted. Take the British government as another case in point. An argument can be made that Britain did nothing, not because the government was anti-Semitic, but because it was afraid of certain elements among the British population that coupled anti-Semitism with a desire to turn England fascist. There was, for example, the Fabian Society, a progressive association of writers and thinkers, including the likes of George Bernard Shaw and H.G. Wells. They were sympathetic to the concept of eugenics, that is, to determine the course of future human evolution, and even sympathetic to the Nazis. George Bernard Shaw actually stated that Nazism and Judaism are the same. Nazism is an understandable reaction to Judaism. In time, there was a good deal of worry over whether representative democracy in Britain was even sustainable. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain was personally worried about the masses, not to let them get out of control as in Germany. He was well aware that some even argued for the replacement of Parliament with a scientific elite. And many in the British government saw World War II not just as a war against Hitler, but a war over the survival of democracy at home. After all, the British knew that Hitler used anti-Semitism that was already prevalent in his own society to finagle his way to power. Could the anti-Semitism prevalent in the English heartland also provoke the rise of fascism in Great Britain? That fear alone meant that British governmental policy would stay far away from the Jews. The government knew that if World War II were presented as a campaign to rescue the Jews of Europe, the latent anti-Semitic and anti-democratic forces at home might make the war very difficult to win. That's because victory in any war requires consensus on the part of its home population. And consensus was precisely what was in danger of being lost. It doesn't make the British government anti-Semitic simply because it recognized the ugly forces at home that it was dealing with. Still, the results for the Jews were catastrophic. In May 1939, Britain succumbed to Arab pressure, stemming from the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, who was a personal confidant of Hitler. Consequently, Britain approved the Malcolm MacDonald White Paper, dropping its proposal for partitioning a national Jewish home in Palestine, as articulated in the 1917 Balfour Declaration. The White Paper virtually shut off Palestine to Jewish immigration as well. with the outbreak of World War II in September, Britain completely closed its doors to Jewish immigration to Palestine. Back in America, there were similar concerns that rescue actions on behalf of the Jews might inflame anti-Semitism in the heartland and damage consensus for the war effort. In June 1944, the Jewish Agency and the Agudat Israel Orthodox group in America demanded that Auschwitz and the railroad lines leading to it be bombed. But since January of that year, the policy of the combined chiefs of staff in Washington had been to concentrate on military targets only. Auschwitz was considered civilian, and America rejected the proposal. A parallel demand was made of the British. In August 1944, the Jewish Agency for Palestine requested, on behalf of Jewish organizations worldwide, that the British Foreign Office green light an attack to bomb the camps, especially Auschwitz-Birkenau. American planes were already bombing Germany, and targets near Auschwitz had already been hit. Winston Churchill, for his part, was a well-known Philo-Semite and favored bombing Auschwitz and the railroad lines. But his demands that the bombings be executed were basically sabotaged by the Foreign Office and the Air Ministry. But since he had neglected to deliver the necessary information about the layout of the camps needed to conduct bombing raids, he decided not to pursue the matter further. He wrote his private secretary as follows.
So far as I can discover, these bombing plans never were in fact communicated to the Air Ministry. The Minister of State on September 1, and on behalf of the Secretary of State, agreed in writing to the Secretary of State for Air that in view of the difficulties of the operation of bombing the camps as requested by the Air Ministry, they said they had no detailed information of the topography, the layout of the camps, the idea of bombing them might be dropped. We are therefore technically guilty of allowing the Air Ministry to get away with it without having given them, though we had it, the information they asked for as a prerequisite. In all the circumstances, I think perhaps, though I feel a bit uneasy about it, we had better let this go by.
But does letting the matter go by make him or his government anti-Semitic? Considering the concentration camps, he later wrote to the Foreign Secretary on July 11, 1944, as follows.
All concerned in this crime who may fall into our hands, including the people who only obeyed orders by carrying out these butcheries, should be put to death.
That may sound fine after Germany's defeat, but as long as the war was going on, the Jews were in a complete trap from all sides. Consider this, that the Jews were actually caught between Hitler on the one hand and the Allies on the other. We might think that the harder the Western powers fought Hitler, the better it would be for the Jews of Europe. But if the Allies had actually taken rescue action on behalf of the Jews, it would have worked against the very Jews they were trying to save. How so? Because Hitler saw the Jews as responsible for all Allied action against Germany. As far as he was concerned, the Jews were directing an international conspiracy. The Allies were in their pocket. This warped idea is clear from Hitler's famous prophecy speech of 1939. If international finance Jewry inside and outside Europe should succeed once more in plunging the nations into yet another world war, the consequences will not be the Bolshevization of the earth and thereby the victory of Jewry, but the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe. If I were a European in the 1930s, would I have been particularly in favor of the Western powers standing up and fighting Hitler? Because if they did, the Jews would certainly get the blame and even more persecution. Ironically, we can argue that the final solution was actually in some way a result of Anglo-American cooperation. For example, the Lend-Lease Act, by which the United States essentially donated to England an enormous amount of military equipment, was seen by Hitler as part of a Jewish conspiracy and provoked him to ramp up his persecution of the Jews all the more. But ironically, the Jews in fact had little or no influence on the American or British governments. The attitude of the Allies was that the Jews have no value as hostages. They would never bargain with Hitler over the fate of the Jews. That also helps explain why the German proposal of the Madagascar Plan never had a chance as far as the Allies were concerned. The Allies would stand resolute against Hitler no matter what he did or did not do to the Jews. Then take the case of the Soviet Union. Prior to the war, Stalin, fearing that the large number of Jews living in the Western territories, formerly the Pale of Settlement, might provoke an invasion by Hitler, decided to uproot many of these Jews and move them further to the east. In doing so, he inadvertently rescued many Jews from Hitler's grasp when he finally did invade. Stalin didn't rescue these Jews because he was a philo-Semite. Certainly he was anything but. But by the same token, we have to be careful about calling the Western powers anti-Semitic for failing to rescue Jews. Bottom line, the behavior of the Allies had nothing to do with the Jews. They simply had other fish to fry. The Allies believed that the only way to stop the genocide was to defeat Germany.
We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. And if, which I do not for a moment believe, this island or a large part of it were subjugated and starving, then our empire beyond the seas, armed and guarded by the British fleet, would carry on the struggle until, in God's good time, the new world, with all its power and might, steps forth to the rescue and liberation of the old.
But in the larger scheme of things, rescue action was deemed to be only a distraction as far as the Allies were concerned. Even when it came to the Evian Conference and the Bermuda Conference on refugees, there would be no serious consideration of raising immigration quotas, only that the war must be won. Then again, how much difference would rescue action really have made? After the war, Hitler's architect and minister of armaments, Albert Speer, testified that it would have been almost impossible to hit the railroad lines leading to Auschwitz from 27,000 feet in the air. He even declared that hitting the railroad lines would have been stupid. as the damage could easily have been repaired by a few Polish workers. In the end, the Allies thought it impractical. The Allies did indeed bomb the railroad lines in northern France, since Eisenhower insisted on it. But the outcome was questionable. And in spite of Allied bombing, German war production actually rose during the war years. When asked what would have happened if the Allies had succeeded in bombing Auschwitz, including the gas chambers, Albert Speer declared that Hitler was so intent on implementing the genocide that he would have ordered the immediate shooting of Jews. Indeed, the Germans didn't need Auschwitz to kill large numbers of men, women, and children. Another example of Allied refusal to take rescue action or negotiate with the Nazis has to do with a deal proposed to save Hungarian Jews. The idea was that the Allies would deliver 10,000 trucks to the Germans in return for 1 million Jews. But the trucks would, of course, be used on the Eastern Front against Stalin, and that would drive a wedge between the Allies. The plan was promptly rejected. In the final analysis, the Germans understood the Allies in Jewish terms. It was all a Jewish conspiracy. The Allies acted in an unconnected fashion. And that's perhaps the most important insight we can glean from all of this. The Allies certainly didn't invent anti-Semitism. What they did do was to take decisions within the constraints of political realities. Their main objective? Win the war. Negotiation on the Jews or rescue action might only damage their domestic consensus. Even when it was all over, the Allies were careful that it not sound to their populations like it had been a Jewish war. At the Nuremberg trials, for example, many Jewish lawyers who would have loved to have served for the prosecution were put aside by Chief Prosecutor Robert Jackson. And the charges against the Nazis might have been framed as genocide against the Jewish people and other minorities. But instead, the issue was blurred into the more nebulous charge of crimes against humanity. As Henry L. Feingold wrote in The Politics of Rescue, the energy, resources, and will committed to rescue never remotely matched the Nazi commitment to liquidation of the Jews. In short, we need to go beyond simply another sermon on man's inhumanity to man. My own impatience with the listless manner in which the State Department approached the rescue problem has, I fear, crept into the narrative. I feel that more might have been done, but I'm also aware that there were many factors in the rescue situation which were simply beyond the Roosevelt administration's control. It is a moral and humanitarian response we seek. Such responses are rare in history and practically non-existent during wartime. The villain of the piece, in the last analysis, may not be the State Department or even certain officials, but the nature of the nation state itself. For the Jews, another lesson emerged from the ashes. Don't expect the nations of the world to look after us. In the final analysis, we must look after ourselves.